Great to be back and see you all, virtually at least. And I see a lot of friends in the participant list. So that's great. I miss you all. I moved to Savannah 3 years ago, for those of you that don't know, and it's been a weird 16 months. And I did come to town, even for the most part, for the first year I was gone every 4 to 6 weeks. So you might not have even known I was gone. I will be at TyCon. So if you're doing an in-person event, I will be there. I can't wait. So I'm really excited to be here. As mentioned, I'm with the Savannah Economic Development Authority, and I run a nonprofit called the Creative Coast. And I'm really focused on how do you cultivate an entrepreneurship community in Savannah, Georgia, and with a focus on tech, hopefully. And that's my job. But over the years, I've been both an entrepreneur, and then for the last 10 years, an entrepreneurial ecosystem builder, first in Atlanta and now in Savannah. And I've worn a lot of hats, moving from what I would say when I was very early in my ecosystem builder phase, working mostly at the aspiring or very early entrepreneur stage. And then in my time at ATDC, very much on the growth stage companies or Series A to growth stage companies. And so I'm really excited to have this conversation with some amazing panelists today. And I'm going to try and shut up and just ask questions and let them answer, because they're the ones growing really amazing, great, rapidly scaling companies today. And so I'm going to go ahead and start with JP, since JP and I have known each other for a long time, and the other folks are new friends of mine. So JP, why don't you introduce yourself and talk a little bit about what Hive Financial does?
Sure, I'll give a quick background. Came to Atlanta really to be an entrepreneur. I think after the Olympics, came here to Georgia Tech for study computer science, biomedical engineering, and left to go build a hedge fund, quantitative based fund in the commodity and futures market, built a lot of algorithms and models in that space. Did well during the last crash, and we ended up selling it in 2015. It was a great exit. But I've always loved building companies, coaching, mentoring, investing. I've got 4 daughters here in Atlanta. They're now Atlanta natives, and they are with their grandparents, and school is done. So Mary and I are going to be hanging out for a few weeks here. So that'll be exciting. Really, all that means, if you're an entrepreneur, is more time to work on your business. So having built several companies, in fact, Tim Olzer, who's on the call right now, helped him with scaling up Lending Science, which was in the marketing analytics and underwriting space. I got to kind of see the FICO spectrum. And actually, if it wasn't for Ty and people like Paul, who helped kick my butt and say, hey, yeah, you need to jump back in 2017. We built, many of you are actually investors of mine in our big portfolio, Leap Credit, which has been spectacularly successful so far, continue to scale. Hive Financial Systems is really where all the team members kind of reside to manage multiple portfolios in the lending space. We serve a very large underserved market for people, is it 70% of the United States has less than $1,000 in savings? And if their car breaks down, they have a medical emergency, there's COVID, there's tornadoes, hurricanes, they need $1,000 to bridge a gap. And that's what we've been able to do with building several lending portfolios. And it's been really exciting. COVID, although we were pretty cautious, was a boom for us. Performance has been phenomenal, and we've scaled up. We expect another 3x growth after the past 70x growth in the last 3 years. And so it's been really exciting from that standpoint. It's all from a tech standpoint. But as we'll probably dive into the details, it's probably very unexpected in the sense that a lot of it's manual before you build the tech to scale. And so we'll probably jump into those details a little bit later.
Awesome. JP, real quick, before I switch gears, how many employees do you currently have?
So core team is less than 20 people or so. And I'd say there's 20 total, but the core team is actually about 6 people, 6 of us who've kind of built the company from scale, built the architecture software, and built really the whole business from that standpoint. So pretty small, but 50,000 plus customers, and that'll 3x in the next 12 to 24 months.
Awesome. Thank you. Sanket, how about you go next? And if you could include number of employees just to kind of give us some and customers to give us some sort of feel of scale, that'd be great.
Unmute as usual. Sanket, you're going to have to unmute.
Sanket, you're still muted.
Deep apologies. Okay, I typically don't do that, but thank you, JP. Yeah, so a couple of things. As far as I'll get into the company kind of details, but just from background, I'm from Tennessee. Unlike JP, this is only my second company. The first one was in the cybersecurity space. I was a actual biomedical engineer in my undergrad days at Vanderbilt, and really went straight into tech. I have a co-founder who's been a buddy of mine since I'm 4. He was already in the cyberspace, so we decided to start our first company where we built cybersecurity products for the SMB market. We did an exit out of that company, and a lot of the things that we learned in our first company was what spawned the company that we have today, which is Securolytics. We do IoT security, which means any connected infrastructure device, or any connected medical device, for example. We work with a lot of hospitals and healthcare providers that connect to the internet. We do discovery and we do vulnerability detection on them. What's interesting is that IoT has a very big sprawl. The Colonial Pipeline, which everybody knows about because they probably waited in line for gas like me that are in Atlanta. That is an IoT play, right? Because the pipeline is connected to a computer. The computer was hacked and the pipeline was shut off. So, there's a very wide scope in IoT. We first initially started with healthcare, and now we're kind of traversing across other verticals. We've done some internal growth hacking, which I'm going to be excited to share with you guys. We've got at Securolytics, we've got right around JP's size, probably sub 20 employees. And we've got a couple hundred customers now, and they're all enterprise. So this is a complete B2B enterprise space that we're working within, which has its own challenges, which requires a lot of hacking if you want to get to the other side. So
awesome, thank you very much. And Animesh.
Yeah, thank you. Great meeting you guys all. Sanket, awesome intro, and JP, great to see you as always. Jen, pleasure meeting you. So my name is Animesh Koratana. Basically grew up in the Atlanta area. I think a lot of you guys actually might know my dad, Go Pollies, I think on the call as well. I grew up in the Atlanta area, basically watching startups grow. Knew JP for the longest time, watched Venerate start out of my basement. And while I was growing up, basically actually ended up doing a lot of testing, a lot of QA, kind of the real manual work for their development team, really when I was in middle school and early high school. Since then, I've grown up a little bit, did a lot of computer science work through high school, well into college. Recently just left Stanford actually. So I spent a lot of time there studying computer science, machine learning, along with basically computer systems. So advised by a lot of the guys who founded Databricks and that crew. But through a lot of the research basically that we did there, ended up starting Testgram.
Classic.
So basically, over the course of a lot of research we did at Stanford, basically ended up starting Testgram, which is the company that we're working on right now. We're at a couple hundred beta users, scaling up really, really quickly, venture-backed. And our core premise is basically solving some of the more fundamental problems around software testing. So basically what we've built is a user simulator that helps you basically address some of the really core problems around software testing at scale. So we take a lot of the core principles that Google, Facebook, Microsoft, Netflix, these really big tech-driven companies have basically built out internally to test their software infrastructure and deliver that in some sort of democratized way to the rest of the world who needs to build and test software.
Awesome. I love it. As a former software developer, testing was always kind of the bane.
Yeah.
We
need a lot more
Nobody really liked testing, right? So before we get into the actual scaling part around rapid growth and tips and tricks and technology, I think it's really important for us to, and I know that they kind of addressed this last time, but establishing product market fit before you start scaling is really, really important. Otherwise, you just end up throwing good money after bad. And so I want to ask you all to talk about how you knew that you had achieved that product market fit and it was time to spend the money on scaling. And Animesh, why don't we start with you?
Oh, okay. All right. Well, that's actually a really interesting question, just because I think a lot of times starting a company is a lot of times kind of likened to jumping out of a plane and trying to assemble the plane on the way down. And I think product market fit is this really weird notion that it's something, it's weird to think that you can ever achieve it because the market itself, I think, is always going to change. I've heard a lot of times defined as a state that you can only feel once you've achieved, but never before. So you'll never know if you have it, but you'll know if you don't have it, kind of thing. And I think that's a common definition that's a lot of times used in kind of post-launch companies. But just recently, actually, we were actually talking about this internally, and what we ended up coming up with was basically kind of mirroring a lot of how we can quantify product market fit at a much smaller scale, right? So we're at 6-7 people right now, growing really quickly. The approach that we saw people that were really inspired by, companies like Superhuman or Slack or Notion for that matter, the way that they basically stay on top of this anchored metric is basically by putting a survey in front of every single one of their users. And they say, hey, if I were to remove this product from your workflow today, how disappointed would you be, right? And on the left side, there's very disappointed. On the right side, there's I wouldn't care, right? And there's basically a metric that you can track around, how many people would really be disappointed if your product just disappeared. And the people that you really want to optimize for are the people who would be very disappointed. Slack, as just an anchoring number, is around 51%. Superhuman is around 40%. These are some of the more successful numbers that we've ever seen. We at Testgram were around 35%. And some of our investors at Dropbox and at Sentry, they're right around the same as well. So this is just kind of like an internal metric that we use to motivate what product market fit could look like. But in the end, it's something that is an ever evolving construct that we don't think we'll ever be able to truly achieve. It's just something we always have to be after.
Excellent. Sanket, any advice from you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's two components when you look at product market fit, right? The kind of the easy answer for us would be to say, to quantify it, right? So when we first hit our first 1 million in ARR, that's kind of like the stick. But there's a lot more to that, right? On the qualitative side. I had mentioned that we had spawned this company based on just a lot of questions and discovery in our previous company that did cyber. And, one of the questions everybody had for us is that we deal with networks was, how do we get visibility on these devices that we're seeing, like the Alexas, the IP cameras, the HVAC systems, all these things that we can't put like an end client on, or, your peripheral firewalls can have inspection on. And so we kept getting that same question, and because we were asking, and so we ended up formulating Securolytics around that. And truly, I think, probably in the last year and a half, I would say there's two pieces to that qualitative. One is just that common desperation, right? When you talk to a customer of like, we need to solve this problem. And we were seeing an uptick on that. And the second is, which comes a little bit after that, was this trickle down effect from larger organizations that were actually budgeting projects around specifically IoT security. So, it's not a snapshot, it's just over a lot of time. But I think that's kind of what went into our kind of product market fit notion.
Awesome. Thank you. JP?
So having gone through this process several times, I cheated the whole process. And Tim, who's on the call, can probably attest to this. I'll tell you the easiest way to know how to do product market fit, and if there's a market out there and you've got the product, is to have somebody else figure it out for you and then bring them back on your team, because they've already made tens of hundreds of millions of dollars doing it, but you're going to do it in a better way. And so we were kind of spoiled. So I had really the first lead management person at Green Sky who scaled it from baby startup to $500 million in revenue. I had the head of marketing and ops for the largest consumer lender who built in our space 0 to 600 million EBITDA and sold it. I had helped raise 800 million in capital for my previous company. And from an analytics standpoint, one of my students from 18 years ago, so I've been teaching quantitative computational finance in the master's and PhD program at Tech as a lecturer there, and also entrepreneurship, a couple of stuff. The guy that I brought on board eventually to help lead our analytics had built his firm from, I think it was about 40 million to 1.2 billion in revenue doing analytics and building models. And we borrowed team, Tim helped out, who had been doing marketing in the space for the biggest lenders in the entire country. And so, I always get to this point when you're building a company after having gone through it so many times, you really have to have a reason to, I always say, like, you get to the point where I couldn't not do it. The equation was there. We had all the pieces of the puzzle. And I really don't like going through this nightmare of starting a company. For those of you who've built companies before, like Animesh was saying, it's not easy. Every plan that you've got never goes accordingly. None of your due dates on any project management system never has worked out. Everything that you think is going to be about your customer just isn't the way that you expect it, and just your business operations, all these other things. So I was like, do I really want to do this again? And, like I said before, Paul kind of said that Paul Lopez had said that he had built a $5 billion mortgage company, and he was retiring April of 2017. He said, hey, I'm thinking about some other stuff to do. What are you up to? And we were talking for a while. And I said, well, I've talked to Tim, who's the founder of Lending Science. We helped him grow his company. This is a specific marketplace. There's a huge demand. We've already been profitable for all of our clients. We know the marketing. So in our space, there's a few metrics, and it's pretty common to many of yours. So you got to get your market, right? So we had experience in how to capture the market. Second thing is, we're a very capital heavy company. We are a balance sheet lender. And so we're never endingly having to raise capital, but I have a lot of experience in being able to do that. And our third real component is performance. If you're going to lend money, it's got to come back and it's going to be profitable. So we kind of had those three, and my background has been building companies and business operations to that kind of balance, that ecosystem. So 2 months into getting operations up and running and lending, we were generating enough cash flow that actually covered all operational expenses. So we were a dead sprint very, very early on. And it's because we just did so much homework in advance on all the vendors in the industry. And you guys have probably already done this as well. We talked to every vendor. What are their metrics? What are their baselines? What do they expect for call center reps, technology, all these expenses that are related to building the company? We basically built our pro forma based on everybody else's numbers and our own experience in the industry. And then we did it manually. And so that's one big caveat I want to, everybody should take away from here. As a tech company, we're probably one of the most manual organizations up front that you'd ever not expect. What I mean by that is we were manually writing the loan docs, sending it via email, getting signatures and having it sent back, and figuring out our process. And could we give money to someone, and could we get money back? I know it sounds obvious and dumb, but the key is that we went through the process manually, figured it out, made sure it worked, then automated. We didn't say, here's all this off-the-shelf software, loan management, loan origination software, marketing, all these pieces of the puzzle that we all know in our industry that are best, the big players out there. We said, how does this actually work? Let's automate it and then scale it up. And every adage that I had heard, and even I had believed for the last 25 years of building companies, was just stay in your lane, have other people outsource all the stuff that you're not good at, and use third-party software, do the mashups, integrate, so you don't have to do it yourself. But I'll tell you, when you do it and you understand your process and you talk to the customer, even today, 4 years later, tens of thousands of customers later, I am personally talking to our customers on origination, personally talking to them on collections, servicing, to understand their experience. I go through the call center training. I go through all of our pieces of the puzzle so that I actually, and everybody on leadership knows exactly manually and physically how that experience is. So when we automate, we can empathize with both sides of the equation rather than being arm's length with it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, if I could add on to that, actually, just real quick. I think that you nailed it. Especially what really resonated there, JP, was that last little bit, right? Staying really close to the customers, and I think like for Leap Credit and Hive Financial, there was a kind of structure, right, as to compare to, who to look to, for what those metrics are. But I think if there was some sort of generalized principle, in the end, that seems to be the one that is as a pattern between, I think, what all three of us said today. It would probably be figuring out whatever heuristics are to figure out if your users are really loving what you're doing or not, right? And then staying really, really close to the customer to making sure that your ear is really close to them. And if it isn't, and you keep kind of looking up to other competition, or keep looking up to people who are bigger than you, you'll diverge and it'll be too late, right? So one thing that we do very, very rigorously internally is to make sure that we're not building features just because somebody else has built it, right? We're not building anything just because it exists, but rather because it's something that our users need at the most fundamental, visceral level, to just drive value. And yeah, I mean, what that looks like day to day is exactly what JP was talking about, like staying on the calls with the customers, right? Making sure that you're hearing directly what that usage looks like, just watching over, ask them to screen share, right? And say, hey, can you use my product for me, and then tell me why you hate it, right? And I think that's where we learn the most.
There's one other thing that really goes straight to growth hack. When you listen to JP and Animesh, right? When you're actually in the process and doing it, right? You can quickly figure out and pick up the signals for any type of network effect, right? Yeah. And so that network effect is literally what can really make you come, right? And if you're not within the process and you're outside the process, it's very hard to pick up those signals, even anecdotally. So yes, 100%, 110% what they said. Do it.
Awesome. So let's go deeper into that network effect, right? So we've found product market fit, we're scaling. How do you figure out what the best distribution channels are for your business, right? And talk a little bit about what channels have worked for you guys, and what you've tested, and what metrics you're using to track that. Okay, JP, why don't you start?
So again, very spoiled on this because with Lending Science, we had already been doing marketing. And so we knew what worked, and we knew what the cost per acquisition was, and we knew what the expected rate of return was going to be up front. So that kind of became our baseline. I know Preeti asked a question, would your competition share numbers with you? They might not share their numbers, but they're going to share everybody else's numbers. They might not share their clients, but they're going to give you baseline metrics for everybody else. And we kind of use that as not really to measure success, but are we headed in the right direction? And yeah, I think that for us, sure, you've got your usual suspects. The one that everybody gets annoyed with is SEO, because it takes forever to get going. But you have to create that organic linking and traffic, which we're constantly building. Initially, we had third-party provider to build a lot of the content, work with us on the keyword analysis, and making sure that our rankings were high on the portfolio side. On the PPC side, one of the things we had to figure out was the experience is going to be different than with lead providers, and then completely different with direct mail. Now, it sounds insane for those of you who would hear that I would say direct mail, but I would tell you, Tim would say this, and several of us in the industry would say, some of the lowest cost per acquisition in our marketplace that's been tried and true has been direct mail. In a way, I think I had heard this adage where if you've got a piece of paper on your desk and it's there and you see it every day and it's an offer, it's how many impressions with a customer that you specifically want. So understanding the mindset and that experience, direct mail is a channel that we're scaling up dramatically this year. And then we have lead channel providers. We're really good at the tech side. We have about 15,000 lead affiliates that do their own ads, radio, TV, newspaper, all these other channels, pipe in leads similar to like LendingTree. And they pipe it into our API architecture. It takes us less than 10 seconds to process. Right now, almost 500,000 people applying for a loan a month on our platform, to go through all the underwriting and all that process to then get to the other side to convert as a customer. And what's great is we get to pay for those leads if we want the lead. So instead of traditional PPC where you're paying by click on the front end, lead channel providers, what we get to do is we get to underwrite them. And if we want them, then we pay for the customer. So there's a lot of differentiation, different markets. Obviously, B2B is completely different than consumer like ours is. But that's been really exciting. And I would challenge, if you've got a business, you really need to just talk to who are the big players and marketing channels out there that have brought leads into your space, and figure out what their expected conversion rates are, what the cost per acquisition is going to be, what are some of those baseline metrics, and then figure out what are the channels you can invest in sooner than later to start getting ramped up from a marketing standpoint.
Awesome. Thank you. Sanket, you're more B2B enterprise.
Absolutely. The tough crowd is what we call it. What I will say, because I know we have a lot of people that are in the startup phase on this Zoom. I love kind of quoting David Sachs, who was, co-founder of PayPal and then founder of Yammer. You need two components, right? One is you need a product hook, and the second is a distribution trick. So I think we've kind of covered the product hook component, but from the distribution trick perspective, I'll talk about it from my perspective. So typically the way that enterprise B2B software is sold, it's a very conventional distribution channel. You have value-added resellers like the CDWs of the world that sell enterprise software to large ones, and it's a very, very crowded space. Even if you just go into our categories specifically for cyber, I always like to show my other child, which is this server. This is the IoT Max. This is our first product. We have two of them now. And so to take this thing, get it inserted into the distribution channel takes a lot of dollars, takes a lot of time, takes a lot of education, as well as there's a lot of lead time in getting these manufactured and pushed through. And it's expensive, right? So you also have limit on sprawl and scope of penetration. So what we ended up coming up with, our distribution trick, was, I'll do my parlor trick here, is that, here's my AirPods. So we came up with a micro server. So this is the Securolytics IoT Mini. And this server in my hand can do exactly what that big server can do, right? So we decreased the form factor size, number one. The second thing we did is we actually decreased our COGS by 95%. So now what we're doing on the distribution side is, instead of trying to set up these meetings and get the servers to them and prep for demo, we can just send these out for free. So we're seeding the distribution channels with these free minis. So we have like 1,000 of them. So I can go out and send them for free. And what we wanted to do is have a very specific call to action with this. Once you plug it in, within 24 hours, you get a report. So we wanted tangible results, right? And the customer can see all of their IoT devices, as well as, more importantly, their vulnerabilities in those devices in a PDF report. that they can internally socialize, email, whatever, right? So that was our trick, and we just launched it this year. COVID hasn't come up yet, but this has kind of been a game changer for us, because for people that are in the B2B space, understand that that four-legged sale, right, with the sales person, the sales engineer, was tremendously thwarted and slowed down, right, during this whole period. So for us, it was really actually going and kind of trying to take this mini and leverage, the digital side of it, right, which in enterprise, once again, in our category, you don't really see a lot of. So it's been pretty disruptive. Our handful of competitors are already kind of catching on to what we're doing. But once again, that's how we've done it.
You're on mute, Jen.
Now I'm muted. Yes, Animesh, to you.
Yeah, of course. So we're actually kind of in between here. So we're not a B2B company, but we're not a B2C company either. We sell to developers and individual developers who then kind of bubble up and then end up making the sale to engineering managers in the future. But I kind of want to reiterate the thing that I was talking about just a few minutes ago here, which is, in order for us to figure out what those distribution channels are, what we had to do was kind of one by one talk to these developers and figure out where they go to buy, right? What are the key kind of decision drivers behind? What are the key decision drivers before they choose to subscribe to a software or even try it out for free, right? And what we realized was a couple of things. I mean, we realized that there were very specific kind of obscure places where our customers existed. There are some blogs called like Hacker News or Product Hunt and things like that, right? Things where the people who we need to access exist and live, and that's where they find out about new products. And the second thing, and this is actually very typical for any developer market, is that developers are hugely driven by word of mouth. They care a lot about what their friends are doing. They care a lot about that status. They care about the fact that they did something cool and that they can share it with their friends. And there's actually really interesting ways to actually build in these types of network effects into the product itself, right? And this kind of adds on to a lot of what JP and Sanket already said. But I think there's actually ways to build in these network effects into the product itself. Now, I don't know if you guys have heard of a tool called Figma, but it's basically this design product that allows you to go out and just design UXs, UIs, right? And they're taking on these really, really big industry players. And their key kind of driver, the thing that got them into the hands of millions and millions of designers out there, was a share button, right? There was a share button that I could just kind of click, and then share it to 4 or 5 of my friends, and immediately within 3 seconds, right, every other person that I shared it with would be able to see my file. And that was a big thing for the design community, right? And while Figma's entire value actually isn't that share button, it ends up kind of becoming this vehicle to get into many more channels. Now, I think one level more abstract representation or explanation of what that is it's a smaller kind of mini value loop that's built into the product, right? You have your core value proposition, which is the actual thing that you're selling, the problem that you're solving. But into the product itself, I think there's a couple of different places where you can build in value loops, places where I can create something that I can then go and share with my friends, or something where I can basically create some sort of asset that I could reuse in the future. And that's what ends up making the product itself sticky. And kind of one step beyond that, it actually ends up making it something that a person who's using it can show off to their friends, right? So at Testgram, actually, we have over-engineered, kind of over-indexed our own product to have those types of value loops everywhere. And we've noticed, every single time that we've actually introduced something like that, it actually ends up having a very substantial impact in the types of questions that we get asked, right? It's hey, can I share this with more people, right? Or can I bring in 3 or 4 more people or my teammates? Or how do I run this so I can show it to my engineering manager, right? And that is kind of the next set of questions that we now need to answer, right? Which is now, rather than focusing entirely on market share, how do we get to the actual sale itself, right? The actual kind of transactional sale. So yeah, I mean, the just to reiterate, the first thing I would say is listen to your customer, right? Go where they are, right? They're not going to come where you are yet. You got to go the other way. And then secondly, these value loops within the product itself are huge to building network effects.
Okay, this next one's a real quick hit. Like if you could only track one metric, what would you track?
Purchase order.
You're the only one with inventory though. So that's a good one for you.
I mean, and actually, you know, so it's always purchase orders, but for us, the one true metric is how many of these minis can we pour in the top of the funnel and how many paid conversions do we get on the other side? Would be what we track.
Okay.
For me, it's that survey. If this product stops existing in your workflow, how disappointed would you be? And the number of people that click, very disappointed.
So for us, it's what we call vintage performance, right? So we've got tens of thousands of loans and customers, and we got to see how they're performing. And we're managing all of our models, our marketing, our capital, everything to that one metric to make sure there's a balance within the ecosystem that our performance is able to be maintained or improved while we're growing our market size simultaneously.
Awesome. We are running out of time, so I'm going to ask one more question, and then we'll probably go to the breakout rooms. We're a little bit over our original schedule, but I had individual questions for each of you, but I'm going to stick with the across the board. One of the things that we haven't talked about is scaling. My own entrepreneurial experience, my very first startup, we raised a lot of money in that, and we got that. The way we solved our scale problem was throwing bodies at it. I think we did a bad job of both at onboarding the people as well as making sure we had the right people in the right role, as well as trying to maintain the culture as we went from 14 people to 300 people. So my question of you is, as CEO founders that have scaling businesses that are just, 70 times where they were a year ago for JP, right? How do you scale and maintain culture? JP, why don't we go with you start?
Yeah, so for those of you who've known me for a while, I think that's it. It's all I do every single day of the week, which is grinding the culture and values and principles and making sure every team member knows them, is in alignment with them, and it bleeds through every single thing from the extreme bottom to the extreme top. So we have our own principles and values. We use the acronym PEACH, and it's partnership, execution, aptitude, communication, and humility. And it's something that we measure every single thing in the company by, because I always look at scalability and massive growth as a symptom of building the small stuff and being very, very detail oriented, especially with, we're in consumer lending, but really a tech company, right? So any small, tiny improvement is a massive ripple effect for us. And there is this disease, because especially when you're growing that fast, of siloing, compartmentalizing, bureaucracy, and process to the nth degree. And I have seen it in every single company. Yes, you can make more and more money, but your productivity and unit component level degrades very, very quickly, right? So I've helped build large-scale manufacturing operations with thousands of employees. And what ends up happening is you get lower quality employees every single step. But I think that if you can, so I talk to the lowest level employees constantly, our call center rep. They're the ones who are actually interfacing directly with a customer or our technology or anything that's right at that detailed level. And if I at the top can call out the details at the bottom, everybody's going to be constantly on their toes watching. And so I think that's where you set that culture and that expectation at the very top, because you're not above anything at the bottom. And when you get into those details, I hear it every single other week where somebody's like, this whole management crap. I'm telling you, All of us know mid-level managers and managers and managers and managers, especially once you get to thousands and thousands of employees. And the only solution everybody has is, let me add another layer of hierarchy in the process, and they're going to somehow magically solve the efficiency and productivity issues. It's not the truth. Yes, you need to have high quality people, but we use this term called team lead, where all of our people who are leading a team is an expert at the detail level of what's going on. Where companies like ours and other companies as they scale have failure is whenever you start hiring people who don't even know what they're talking about. They're like, oh, I'm going to manage the priorities. I've got the project management tools. I'm going to check in once a week what they're up to. If they have any problems, I'll help with removing the blockers. But they have no tactical understanding of what they're talking about. So it is mandatory for us when we hire people that are quote unquote senior people, that they are getting into the details of exactly what is going on. And there's no excuses saying, oh, well, so-and-so is going to hand it off. The other disease that I see is this whole hierarchical crap where I remember it was a couple years ago, I had a call center rep who said, I have an IT issue. It took 2 weeks, it took 2 weeks to go from them to the supervisor, to their manager, to somebody else, a manager on our team, over to the technology person, down to the project manager, to the QA person, or to the developer, to the QA person. It took 2 weeks just to have a conversation. I said, guys, this is unacceptable. If you want to get 3x, 10x, 100x bigger, it can't be 2 weeks to have one simple piece of communication get across the organization. So our role as the entrepreneur, CEO, whatever it is in leadership, is to make sure that communication line is bridged very rapidly, and you have a rapid response type of approach. And I'll tell you that the best mentors that I've had are not within business on this approach. It is special forces. One of my good friends is General Patel. He's a 4-star general, ran SOCOM and JSOC before. And the key is you got to get the people at the top knowing exactly what's at the bottom and get all the BS out of their way. Otherwise, you won't be able to get rapid scalability. And it just is a disease that is rampant, where it's hierarchical management structure that says that's going to solve all the problems. And you know, what is it like on the movie? What is it? Office Space, TPS reports. Like the TPS reports just get more reports, send me more reports, and magically all the problems are going to get solved. But, you know, honestly, it's getting to the detail level and holding that line by you yourself, knowing the details rather than trying to outsource it to somebody else.
Awesome. Sanket, Animesh, anything to add before we go to the breakout rooms?
Yeah, no, I definitely second a lot of what JP said there. I mean, we're not at a place yet, you know, where we're thousands of people or anything like that. But I definitely agree with the idea of, you know, making sure that people at the top understand everything at the bottom. And the way we do that internally at Testgram, at least, is, and this might actually also be a function of age and my personal age here, is to make sure that rather than assigning tasks, we assign questions. Right. We assign basically open questions for the business to people who are better than us at handling it. Right. Like our CTO can handle technical questions, but he handles questions. He doesn't handle tasks. Right. We never say, go build this exactly. We need to say, we need to achieve this or that. Right. And the question itself is something that person can then implicitly take ownership over. And the details of which basically they become the owners of as well. So it's just a tool and like a management technique, if anything, that we found to be really successful in just making our own people own the problems that they're solving and own the solutions that they're creating.
Yeah, I mean, I think Animesh and once again JP covered it all. But I will say, you know, in our organization, whether you're on the sales side, whether you're on the marketing side, everybody gets the support. And it's the dreaded support queue, but they get it. And, you know, they get an email queue. I mean, you know, they can VoIP and actually answer calls. But once you start doing that and cycling through each component of your organization, very quickly people are in the know and understand that. And that gap that JP's talking about, right? That product and that information gap, you start mitigating it, right? And closing it down. And that's been a big piece for us. And you get real valuable information because you have, you know, a product manager or you have a marketing person actually talking to an actual customer, and they just get discovery, which is, I mean, for everybody that's listening, I mean, that is just so vital. And they'll bring it back to us and say, oh, by the way, do you know if this was blue, they would be really happy, right? So, I think that's one thing. The other thing for us is that our team is basically all referred by other employees because, number one, also what JP said, it is like kids, right? I mean, it doesn't matter what school you send them to, it doesn't matter where they go. It's always set by example. So if you start and everybody starts small, and you start adding employees, getting them to refer other employees, what we've seen is that there is a commonality in work ethic as well as approach. People typically surround themselves with people around them, or maybe even better, right? So we've been fortuitous on that side as well.
Awesome. Awesome. We are over time, so I'm going to pass it back over. I do want to say it was a real pleasure being here, and it was a real delight to connect with all of you. And I'm going to do my best to try and serve all three of your companies by connecting you to customers in Savannah if I can. So watch for some intros from me.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Jen, JP, Sanket, Animesh, thanks guys for breaking a lot of detail down and providing a lot of insights as well. This recording will be on YouTube, so you guys can share it across.